All right, welcome inside episode 6 of the Forge Your Strength podcast. As usual, we're going to jump right into it here. I'm super excited to have my guest here, someone I've worked with on the professional level, and we've sort of remained in touch over the years as well. None other than my man, Steve Spott. Spotter, how you doing?
Good, Dante. Thanks so much for having me on. It's great seeing you again, and obviously, I'm a huge fan of you and what you do. So I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you coming. It's just to go back to the origins of our relationship here. We actually met when I started training your son when he was about 15 years old. And we were just talking offline here, but I'll share the story quickly. We called him the Muffin Man for a number of years because every day when he was 15, we'd ask him, he's interested in getting stronger, putting on weight. We talked a little bit about nutrition as we would with anyone. And we say, Ty, what'd you eat today? A muffin. What'd you eat today? A muffin every day. So he was the Muffin Man for about 6 months of my life. And I know he's doing really well now. And as are you with just coming off the season with the Dallas Stars there. So I appreciate you coming on. And one of the things I want to do with this podcast is talk about maybe the kind of psychological side of the sport. Mental health is a big part of the conversation these days in any endeavor, but particularly in sports, as it should be. And I think there's a big kind of overlap there that I'm excited to explore with you. So I guess my first question for you would be, oftentimes when we talk about Steve Spott, and I've probably spoken about no less than 50 NHL guys who have, played for you in various capacities over the years. And one of the things that always comes up is how good of a communicator you are as a coach, in addition to being such a great person. So what have you learned about communication in the 20 years that you've been a coach, and maybe how has that changed over those years?
It's a great question, Dante. I think it's probably, I think when people think you're an NHL coach, you obviously have to have a hockey acumen. You have to understand the game technically. You have to understand the game tactically. But I think today's athlete, and I won't just speak for NHL players, I'll speak for the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. The lines of communication have to be better now than they've ever been. We've got 23 players on our roster, 23 different personalities, and age ranges. Last year with the Dallas Stars, we had Wyatt Johnson at 18, and we had Joe Pavelski at 38. And so you're dealing with a generational gap of communication, and that's what we're dealing with today. Every NHL coach, every professional coach has to find ways to motivate each player individually, and get the best out of his or her athletes. And for us, it's been a challenge, because of the fact that we are so much more prepared as coaches. We have learned so much more about mental health, concussions, the importance of communication, that our lines of communication have never had to be stronger than they are today with today's athlete.
Is it different at all for those 20-year-olds now relative to maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago? Do you see a difference at all, or is it, 20s 20?
No, you do. I think the visual aspect of the sport is different, where when you played, I could pull out a rink board, sit down with you. We could draw up our forecheck. We could draw up our D zone coverage, face off assignments, power play, penalty kill. And you and I would have dialogue and discuss what we want you to do with a Sharpie and an erasable board. Those days are done. I think it's widely known now that we have technology on our benches. We use it as coaches during periods. We use it during the game with players, and they want feedback. They want individual feedback, and they want to see visually where they can get better, areas that maybe they need to work on. So I think today's athlete is not like when you were playing, where we could just talk on a rink board. It's all about visual aids now, and those levels of communication where we're showing them what they could do better and what they've done well. So I think that to be is probably one of the biggest changes is the visual aids that we now use and the technology we use to try to get the most out of these athletes.
Super interesting. Is there an element of that kind of paper pencil methodology that you miss at all? Because I remember,
Yeah,
and this maybe speaks more to a broader discussion around hockey players in general, maybe athletes as a whole, but particularly hockey players are often very unfairly characterized as the dumb guys, for whatever reason, the different path that they've taken. And I remember vividly, like being in the gym, teaching these guys very technical exercises, all these things, and they're struggling with those things, which is okay. Not the first time I'd seen that. And then going down to ice level and being on the bench, watching guys rip through drill after drill, no mistakes, getting to you to the board. You drop a play that looked more complex than anything I'd ever seen. You've got one guy squeezing, a little drink into his mouth, paying attention to you through one eye. Another guy's huffing and puffing, looking down at the ice, but listening. Another guy's locked in, dialed in, and no problem. Across the board, the next drill, you fire it up and they're ready to go. I'm confused 10 seconds into your explanation of that drill. So I wonder if there's an element of that that's missing or that you miss at all, or is it kind of still something you can do with technology?
Well, I think Pete DeBoer still uses it. He still believes on a whiteboard during drills and practice. He still uses it between periods, along with the iPad support. He might say Spotter or Lane Nazardine. He might send us into the room and show Tyler Seguin a video clip of something, or one of our players something on video. With the team stuff, he still will use a whiteboard to address the players. So for Wyatt Johnson, he's using it. For Joe Pavelski or Jamie Benn, they're using it. Ryan Suter. Yeah. So, but it's knowing that with a Wyatt Johnson, not only is it a whiteboard, but it's probably also sitting with him individually through video and then showing as an 18 or 19-year-old what was being done and reinforcing Pete's message. So it just, for me, that's probably the biggest change, Dante, is the use of technology today in professional sports and even in junior sports. It's growing. I would assume in minor hockey now, they're videoing games and coaches are breaking it down as best they can. So I think that's been the biggest change for me over 20 years, is just seeing how we communicate to our athletes with the use of technology.
Super interesting. It speaks to your adaptability as a coach and being able to keep up with the times as they progress. But I wonder, speaking of adaptability, are there clues that you kind of look for to better tailor your communication person to person, maybe irrespective of technology, but certain cues, body language wise, or even just their speech patterns, how to kind of tailor, maybe particularly in the time of struggle, how you go about choosing the right way, the timing, and the approach that you take in terms of communicating with players?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes it's through mistakes.
Right.
Sometimes it's through showing a player negative video, or what we call teaching video, and him not responding and not doing well with it. And then learning through that process that, maybe this player needs a little bit more reassurance with positive video, or you and I sitting looking at a video clip and me challenging you, saying, what do you see here? Do you like the decision you made? What could you do different? So for me, I'm a school teacher by trade. It's using some of those tactics to try to use my students, or now my players, to draw information out of them, where maybe it's just not me telling them this is what you have to do. It's more now collaborative, where what do you see here? Do you like the read you made on that forecheck, or what would you do different? Do you like how you battled for that puck, or how did it look to you? Do you think maybe you could have been more competitive? And then having them come to the answer, as opposed to, maybe back in the day, it's you and I sitting down and saying, hey, Dante, I don't like this. You've got to do this better. And you leaving my office feeling pretty poor about yourself. Those days are done. It's a lot more collaborative now, where it's me saying, hey, Dante, what do you see here? Do you like your battle level? Could it have been better? And that's the way we have to teach now. It's with association. It's getting people involved, giving them a say, so that, what people say, we have to eliminate excuses, so that when you leave the Dallas Stars, you've been given every resource to make yourself as successful as possible.
Bit of that Socratic method and getting them engaged in the process as well. I think that's super, super interesting. I wonder if there's ever like a tipping point there, because in my field, we call ourselves coaches. We're all just trainers, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You, as a true coach by profession, there's an inherent kind of power dynamic there. With me in my profession, it's easy sometimes, especially in the younger generation, for them to, no matter if they've been referred or not, sometimes they just see you as like trainer guy, like, yeah. Spots today, what are we doing? How many sets? Okay, cool. When they come to you, there's this natural kind of hierarchy. There's this power dynamic at play. And I wonder, how do you maintain a sense of authority without kind of losing your approachability as a person, as a coach?
Well, it's critical. It's critical for Steve Spott, Pete DeBoer, Sheldon Keefe, but it's also critical to that, 25-year-old female or male coach that's coaching 7 or 8-year-old boys or girls. I think we are in positions of authority, and it's incredible how many times that young boy, that young girl, that NHL player, that Olympian female hockey player will listen to their coach sometimes more than their own parents, because that is the sign of authority, and they want to please. So I think you really have to be aware of it as a coach, and recognize and appreciate that those kids are at our level. Those professional athletes are looking up to you for answers. They're looking up to you to get better. They want to please. They want to be successful individually, and they want to help their team win. So I think we really have to be careful across the board not to abuse that power, and know that these athletes are looking up at us for answers. And I think you really, Dante, more than ever, have to be aware of it. We really are teachers in many, many ways, and recognizing that they are going to listen to our words, and they're going to do what they can to help not only us, but themselves and their team be successful. So I think for all of us across the board as coaches, we have to be careful with that abuse of power.
With great power comes great responsibility, the old Spider-Man quote there, right?
That's right.
Let's take it away from coaching for a second there, but keep it with leadership. It's maybe a term that's discussed at large, but there are certainly some more finer points to it, some nuance to it as well. What does leadership look like in an NHL dressing room outside of the coaches? What does that look like? What does it sound like?
I got a great story. So we drafted Wyatt Johnson from the Windsor Spitfires last year, 12 months ago, basically. And there's no way he's going to make our hockey club. It's not possible. Not big enough, not strong enough, not fast enough. That's the typical. But what he did was come into training camp, play an exhibition game, play a second exhibition game, better and better and better. Scored 20 goals. He's in the rookie of the year for the NHL conversation. Power play, penalty kill, last minute of the game, 6-on-5 or 5-on-6. And he's playing basically like a 30-year-old player at 18.
Incredible.
What people don't see behind the curtain is when we went to Joe Pavelski at the beginning of our season and said, Joe, would you and your wife be interested in having Wyatt Johnson live with you? And that was a calculated move. Anyone that knows Joe Pavelski knows the type of person that he is. He has a son, Nathan. He and his wife are just incredible people. And we knew that mentorship or that type of a role model would be invaluable for a Wyatt Johnson. So he's lived with the Pavelskis all year, and how he saw Joe go to the games, prepare and practice, how he ate before he went to the rink for practice and or the games, that was invaluable to Wyatt Johnson. And one day, hopefully, he'll pay back the next Wyatt Johnson 10 years from now that's coming through the NHL. But that for me is leadership. It's putting your players around good people, whether it be staff, strength conditioning, medical equipment, and then their players, because that leadership rubs off to these young players. So that to me is a great example of how Wyatt Johnson, we see how successful he is on the ice, but Joe Pavelski helped him through that process off the ice, with the way he conducts himself as a professional athlete.
That's brilliant, man. Leadership takes the necessity to zoom out, because you spoke so much more than just about on-ice skills. I'm sure there's any number of thousands of things that he could have helped him with, but there's so much more to the life, the preparation, the opportunities that go into preparing for being an NHL player. So that's amazing. Now you have the unique perspective with Joe Pavelski, particularly, of seeing him now towards the later stages of his career, where he's very obviously, no matter how you define leadership, someone you would probably think of off the top of your head pretty quickly if you're familiar with the hockey circles. What was he like in those younger days? Was it something that you saw at some point, this guy's going to be a great leader, or he already is, even at a young age?
Well, again, Joe is one of those guys. He's a 7th round NHL pick. The odds were stacked against him. Not a very big guy, not the fastest player, but worked on his craft. And he knew that his great skill, or his greatest skill, was his ability to get to the net front and deflect pucks or tip pucks into the net. And he worked on it every day. And I think if you look at anybody that knows Joe, they'll tell you how hard he works on a game day, before a game. He'll go out early before pregame skate, and he has a routine he goes through, just working on high deflections and high tips and rebounds around the net. And we kidded back in the day. I say, Joe, like, you're not the fastest guy through the neutral zone. You don't get breakaways. And he said, Spotter, I'll tell you what, he goes, I just have to beat a defenseman from the corner to the net front. And if I do that, I have a chance of scoring. And he takes a lot of pride in that. And what that does is it shows the young players in Dallas, the Ty Delandrias, or back in the day, the Kevin LeBancs in San Jose or the Chris Tierney's in San Jose, that's rubbed off. But Joe didn't learn that by himself. What he did is he had Patrick Marleau and Joe Thornton. And those two guys, Hall of Famers, show Joe Pavelski, Logan Couture, Brent Burns the way to be leaders. And all that has done is transcend and go down the ladder now where Joe is passing it on. And we hope now the Wyatt Johnsons or the Logan Stankovens that are coming through our program will then pass it on to the future of our club. But it's passed down traditionally. It's no fluke that you surround yourself with good people and good things happen. I think Joe Pavelski's been fortunate to be around the Thorntons and the Marlows early in his career, and it's rubbed off.
When you have so many of those leaders in a room, I think sometimes, the too many cooks in the kitchen line tends to apply to other endeavors of life. But it seems to be one of those things where you can't really have enough good leaders because there's almost like an inherent understanding of if you truly are a good leader, you'll accept the role that's been bestowed upon you and where you kind of fall in that pecking order. But how do you go about, because there's only one seat, right? There's a couple of A's and only one seat. What is like a distinguishing characteristic when you have 3 or 4 guys that any one of them could be good captains that you as coaches say that's the guy?
For us, it's the willingness to sacrifice the individual for the team. Jamie Benn is a good example of that. Jamie Benn had his ice time reduced this year by Peter DeBoer, and not for the sake of hurting Jamie Benn. It was for the sake of helping Jamie, where he'd have better 5-on-5 game. He'd have a better power play because he'd have more pop in his legs. And what we did was reduce his penalty kill time. And the first thing Jamie Benn said, I don't care. He said, I like to kill penalties, but if this is going to be what's best for our club, I'm willing to sacrifice some of my individual time and my individual accolades or success for what's best of the hockey club. Joe Pavelski, one of the best penalty killers in his career in the NHL, reduced penalty kill time, maybe just a face off, and then he gets off the ice. So when those young players, the Delandrys of the world, see that, where these veteran players are willing to sacrifice individual accolades, individual time, opportunity to stay out there, maybe another 20 seconds. No, they don't. They get a good line change. That rubs off on the young players. So for me, Dante, it's those players that are comfortable enough in their own skin to sacrifice some individual success for what's good of the team. Those are the guys. And they lead differently. Jamie Benn is a quiet leader. He's a physical, quiet leader. Joe Pavelski is going to speak his mind at the right time between periods or after a game. So I think it's knowing which players, what makes them tick, and then obviously leaning on those guys. And Pete DeBoer has a leadership group of about 5 guys that he leans on quite a bit. And those 5 guys help with the messaging from our office into the locker room.
Very interesting, because I think sometimes from the outsider's perspective, and you hear this often when there's turmoil, when things are going well, people don't care, it's all good. When there's turmoil, when the team's not doing well, they try and pick at, okay, what's the problem here, right? Especially from a fan's perspective. So when you look at a leadership group, it's easy to look at an interview or a clip or a soundbite here and there of a guy and say, well, that guy should be the captain, based on his answer to X, Y, and Z. And you spoke a little bit about the qualities that exist there, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about how some of them are actually quiet in nature. It's not the rah-rah speech all the time. Tell me a little bit about a guy like Joe Thornton, because I think his name gets tossed out there quite a bit over the course of his career for being the guy that was, would say the thing in the room. Is that true?
We say he's kind of the last of a dying breed. When you talk to the guys in Florida, when you talk to Sheldon here in Toronto, obviously we had him in San Jose. Joe wears his heart on his sleeve. And that's the truth. If he doesn't think you're pulling your weight, you're going to hear about it. 9 times out of 10, before Pete DeBoer would go into a locker room with a message, it's probably been delivered by Jumbo at some point. And he's hard. I think he's softened with regards to maybe some of his messaging later on in his career. But I think when he was the best player in the world in the NHL, he was a guy that let you know where you stand. And if you were not pulling your weight or playing up to his expectations, you were going to hear about it. So not many guys like him left. There's still a few. But I would say Jumbo or Joe Thornton is one of those guys that is of a dying breed where, he's just going to let you know between periods where you stand and with regards to his expectation of you as a player. So just a real vocal, passionate guy, score, fight, do everything. And that's why he's going to be a Hall of Fame player.
No kidding. Would he at all tailor the response based on the person's response to him calling them out? Was it kind of like a follow-up discussion, or was it like this is just what you need to do, and then the coaches can deal with the rest?
Well, if you were playing with him and you were not competitive enough or playing to your capabilities, he would let you know between periods, and he would get on you hard in front of your teammates. He was just one of those guys that would deliver hard news to you. But the next night, we're on the road in Arizona. You're going to go to dinner with him, and
There you go.
he's going to treat you like you're the best player in the world. And that's where Jumbo was such a special guy. Hard on you for those 2.5, 3 hours, driving you to be the best that you can be. But the next night, he's the first guy to take you out for dinner and make you feel like a little brother or a guy that's his best friend. So he just had that great feel how to get the best out of people as a player.
I think that's amazing, because no matter who you are, how tough you think you are, it always feels good in some capacity for someone to do something nice for you, right? It always feels good to feel good, as it were. So I think it's important to kind of at least touch on both sides of it. If you're going to be the guy that demands a lot, then there's a certain element of giving a lot as well. Now let's shift topics a little bit. There's this idea of these clutch performers. So far, we talked a lot about leadership and the psychology that goes into preparing for an NHL season. This idea of being clutch, because some of those players largely we could define as clutch. They've all had moments in their career where they've scored, tying goals to push it to overtime, or overtime winners, or Game 7 winners, or whatever the case may be. Some say that over a large enough sample size, it all kind of washes out, that the better players just tend to perform better more often than not, and that some of those moments happen to be in high pressure situations. Is that true to you, or do you see something different amongst these players that are labeled as clutch? Maybe a guy like Joe Pavelski. Do they do something different going into that game, or is it just they stick to their process and then happen to flourish at the right time?
It's a great question. I think sometimes as coaches, or any sport, you might be coaching soccer, you get into those critical situations, and we see on the bench some guys going down and tying their skates because they don't want to be out there. And then there's other guys that are standing up and kind of stretching and loosening up.
No
And they
kidding.
want to be out there. And it's an interesting dynamic, and that's God-given. That's human nature. There are just some athletes that want to be in those situations and some that don't. And it's no different than writing a final chemistry exam. Some go in not prepared, not feeling good about it, and some that know they're going to ace it. And a lot of that's God-given. They just understand chemistry. So I think for me, it's knowing the dynamics individually of each player. And the players that we've talked about, it's no accident that Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner are going to score big goals in big games. They've done it their whole career, and that's how they're wired. If there's a penalty shot with a game on the line, they may or may not score, but they want to be the guys to be given the opportunity. So I think that there is an inherent God-given ability with some athletes that some just don't have. It's no different than any walk of life. And when you talk about the Thorntons, the Marlows, the Pavelskis, when you think about the, Jamie Benns of the world, Jack Eichel, who we had in Vegas, they're just different athletes. They are what we call world-class athletes, and they can hit a baseball, they can hit a 3-point shot. Those guys are just different, no different than the Michael Jordans of the world, or some of the greatest golfers in the world. They're just different athletes, and God gave them something that not everybody else has.
It's amazing how effortless they make that stuff look, right? Transitioning from sport to sport. It's just, I could watch, I remember there's a clip of, maybe it was Austin Matthews at the Rogers Center, the Skydome there, just hitting bombs. And you're like, that looks like that guy's done that his whole life. It's wild. A different swing than a hockey swing, but than a slap shot, but wow. Let's circle back here to the top. We talked a little bit about how important those open lines of communication are. Given the nature of the business that, at some point everyone either gets fired or retired, right? If you play for one team or coach for one team your whole life, that's amazing. But eventually, it all ends. But there are players that you play with or coach that change teams as well throughout that entire process, throughout that entire career. So it's never just something that's stagnant. Are those lines of communication still open between you and some of those players that you no longer coach? Or is it something that, like, during the season, it's kind of, it's no go, and then maybe in the off season you'll open the discussion?
Gabe Landeskog is a player that I was coaching the Kitchener Rangers. Gabe Landeskog was a player that was playing in Sweden, and I had scouted him and drafted him and brought him to Kitchener, and he was a Kitchener Ranger. He was the first European-born player captain as a Kitchener Ranger in the Ontario Hockey League. Went on the following year to win the Calder Cup. I was Rookie of the Year for the Colorado Avalanche, captain of Colorado, Stanley Cup champion of Colorado. Every time I go to Colorado, I always see him at pregame skate, and we always have a smile, a nod, or a handshake, and always say hi. In the off season, it's great that you can connect with players. You see them at skates in the summer. You can connect, but during the season, I would say it's more before pregame skate, saying hi, after pregame skate, or after the game where you say hi. And there's always going to be that line of respect both ways, player to coach, coach to player, that you share a lot of positive experiences with. So it's great when we go on the road. I'm dating myself or aging myself, but usually in all 31 other teams now, there's somebody that I've crossed paths with. So it's always nice to say hi or shake a hand of someone that you haven't seen in a while and catch up.
Interesting. Now, you're someone who's incredibly humble, generous with your time. Coming on my little podcast here, I appreciate that. Are there any moments that you've ever felt in your career that you've either lost a belief in yourself or some sense of confidence in your abilities as a coach, perhaps when things weren't clicking the way you wanted to? And if that's the case, how did you break out of that?
It's hard. I was in 2014, I was the head coach of the Toronto Marlies in the American Hockey League. The following year, I was promoted to go up to the Toronto Maple Leafs as an assistant coach. That year, we did not make the playoffs, and I was fired. I remember having to leave the Air Canada Center, calling my son and my daughter and my wife and letting them know what just had happened to their husband and to their father. Mm-hmm. And of course you do. You question, am I good enough to do this? Can I do this? And I think that just goes through anybody with regards to a player and or a coach that does not have success. The question is, how do you deal with it? Mm-hmm. And for me, I couldn't show. Obviously, I was disappointed, but I wanted to show that I was able to do it. I was very fortunate then to get hired by San Jose and then never look back. But of course you do. I think anytime you deal with adversity as a coach or a player, you're going to question your abilities. And for me, it's surrounding yourself. I think everybody kind of has a mentor. I've been very fortunate. Colin Campbell, the vice president of the NHL, has always been like a mentor to me or a father to me. And when times are down, he's a guy that I could call, or he would know well enough to call me and pick you up and make you feel good about yourself. But the one thing about the NHL coaching fraternity, it's very close. We all support each other. We compete. We want to win. But when someone is relieved of their duties, you're getting messages. And it's one of those things, Dante, should I wait a week? Should I wait a week? You call right away or you dial right away. I've learned that. And let them know right away that you've got their back and that they're going to work again shortly. And so for me, it's 100%. I felt down after I was let go by the Leafs, and that's just, to me, human nature. But it's just in how you deal with it, having confidence in your own ability, knowing that if you do get a second chance, that you're going to find success that you believe yourself in.
And the quicker you can turn that page, the better, it sounds like.
Yeah, you have to, and you can't let it fester. You're exactly right. I think if you let it fester, it's only going to dwell in you. You can't sleep in the next day. You got to get up, go to work, and make sure that you're trying to make yourself better through an interview process or whatever you have to do to try to find that next opportunity.
Not to take you back to that time, but in your time with the Leafs, you would have crossed paths with a guy like Phil Kessel.
Yeah.
Who, by all accounts, everyone's got a Phil story, right? Yeah. And they're usually great. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, he was a guy that was, especially in this time here, brought up in these kind of critical elements around leadership and these, different narratives like that. Now, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, damn near won the Conn Smythe his first or second year in Pittsburgh, whatever that was. What was he like?
Phil's a highly, highly competitive guy. And that's what people have to understand. They see a certain Phil Kessel sometimes in Toronto. We all know this is the hockey mecca. And, there's a magnifying glass in every player and every coach that comes through the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I can tell you, having coached Phil and now having coached against Phil, a highly competitive guy. We talk about those guys that want to be on the ice in overtime and be in critical situations, be out on a 5-on-3 to score the big goal. Phil's that guy. He's done it all his career. You just have to look at his playoff numbers to know what type of player he is. He's a world-class player. You know, he's a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. And I'll tell you what, once you get to know him, a tremendous teammate, a guy you want to be around, a guy you want to go to dinner with, associate with, because he just has a great positive energy about him. But when the puck does drop, he's highly competitive and he wants to be a go-to guy.
Nowadays, when the season ends for you, particularly after something like the season you were just through in Dallas, where incredibly competitive, you guys had a deep run. For the players, it's, you know, everybody knows what happens those couple of weeks after. There's 2-3 weeks off the ice. Maybe you guys book a vacation here and there. Let the body rest and recover. For you, what does that look like? What does the recovery portion after a season look like?
Yeah, we do. We decompress too. It takes time, because you literally go from 100 miles an hour to 0, and it's hard, as you well know. So for us now, what we're starting to do is get into the kind of the analytic audit of our team, 5-on-5 and through special teams, goaltending, and then breaking down. Analytics has become a huge part of our sport now. We use it as a tool. And it doesn't tell you the full story, but it does give you some information with regards to where you can improve or what you've done well. So we're at that point right now where this morning even I received an email regarding some information that I needed numbers on to now start building up my meetings for training camp in September and October, so that these numbers reinforce what I see with my eye. So I think for us right now, this time of year, looking at our systems, what we did well, what we want to work on, and then looking at it not only through video, but analytically as well.
Are there formalized player meetings in the form of like an exit meeting at the end of the year? Are there formalized like intro meetings to a season as well, player to player?
Well, there is. Beginning of the year, individual meetings with the coaching staff. We lay out our expectations of you as a player, realistic goals. You know, it's hard to ask a 4th-line player to come in and score 50 goals. I think it's setting realistic goals for that player, that athlete. And then during the year, whether it's Pete, myself, Elaine Nazardine, our sports psychologist, it's constant communication with that player. And then at the end of the year, yes, there's individual meetings as well where that player will sit down with Pete by himself, with us as a coaching staff, and then they'll go up and see our management as well. Jim Nill will have a meeting with those players, just so that there's no stones left unturned, that Jim has a good feel of what the player thought of the coaching staff. It's all confidential, but it's to make everybody better. And for me, that's a big part of this, so that that player knows when he leaves our organization and is preparing for the next season, he knows what he needs to improve on or what we liked what he did. But there's no, as I said, no stone left unturned with regards to the dialogue and what he needs to do.
It's a 24/7 gig in season, isn't it?
It really is, more than ever. And even this time of year, myself calling forwards, checking in. I spoke with Matt Duchesne 2 days ago. I'll drive up to Halliburton to see him at his cottage, have a coffee, find out about him, what he likes, where he wants to be on the ice. And so that when we go into training camp, Matt already has an idea of what we expect of him and what he's going to see from us. So those are the things behind the curtain a lot of times that people don't see.
Is it ever something that you struggle with, or a challenge perhaps, to separate yourself from the season or the difficulty of the season while in season? Because if your coaching lines are open 24/7, you know, that's a lot for anyone to handle.
It's hard. You know, one thing I learned a long time ago, especially in our sport and probably in any walk of life, no matter what you do, whether you have a trade or, you know, whatever line of work you're in, I think we have to be careful trying to leave our jobs at the office, leave them at the rink in my case, so that you're not bringing it home. Obviously, your wife is going to be someone that you can lean on, vent to, discuss. But I think for my kids, they never knew growing up if we had won or lost. I always try to keep the same temperament inside the household because it's an emotional time. It drains you. So I think to answer your question, I think that it's parking as much as you can your emotions in the office, and you're not taking those home with you to your families.
Not easy. Is what is your specific pregame routine like? I know a lot of guys talk about the different music that they play and you know, different kind of mindset focus strategies that they have. What is it like for you?
You know, for myself, Jeff Reese and I, we've got basically in Dallas, from our practice rink to our game rink is probably Stouffville to downtown Toronto. That's kind of, if that gives you a little bit of a marker. So we meet at the practice rink, and Jeff and I will have coffee and drive in together for pregame skates. pregame skate, watch the opposition pregame skate, head back, go home, have lunch, and some guys sleep. Some guys will literally shut the drapes, close their eyes for a couple hours, wake up and go. I was never able to do that. I'll kind of sit in a chair, watch a little bit of television, doze off, get my thoughts. So everyone's different. I just didn't feel great waking up at 3 or 3:30 after a 2-hour nap in the dark. That's just not for me. So I kind of doze off, gather my thoughts, do my own thing, head back to the rink, and then it's just preparing for any meeting that I might have before a game, individually with a player or a team session, and then just dialing myself in. And then we're watching TV, we're watching other games, and just trying to obviously prepare mentally for our game as well.
Love it. Last question. For the Leafs fans out there, give us the skinny on Max Domi.
Yeah, huge fan. I'll tell you, I knew Matt a little bit through the summer. Adam Graves and I are best friends, so I knew Ty Domi, obviously Max's dad, through Adam Graves. And we had nothing, and obviously teams had called asking about Max because he was a free agent. Nothing but a positive experience on and off the ice. Highly competitive, world-class skill. I think it's a brilliant signing by Brad Treliving, Shane Doan, and I think Leaf fans are going to love him because of the fact he's highly competitive, he's aggressive. He brings that Doug Gilmour type style to the Toronto Maple Leafs now, where he can play any type of way you want to play. He can play a skill game, he can play a physical game, and just what people didn't see was the way he treated our equipment staff, our medical staff, our strength and conditioning staff. Just a class act off the ice, and that's a tribute to Ty and Leanne Domi, his parents. Just a wonderful kid, a true pro, and I'm glad I don't have to play against him only twice this year because he really was a real good addition for us, and we have nothing but praise for Max.
Listen, Spotter, this has been amazing. I appreciate this. Tons of insight. I'm excited to get this episode up and running, but I'm looking forward to chatting again soon.
That's awesome. Thanks for having me on, Dante. I appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.